The sky above the colony on Ares 7 was a dull, ashen gray, broken only by the occasional flash of lightning that danced across the jagged horizon. Humans had settled here generations ago, not because the world was easy to live on, but because it was deadly. The planet's atmosphere was thin, storms were frequent, and the ground itself seemed to conspire against anyone who tried to farm or mine. Yet humans endured as they always did. They had no choice, really, for this was one of the few places left in the outer rim where the Deathworlders, the galaxy's dominant species, allowed them to exist as laborers, miners, and expendable colonists. Mara Kellen adjusted the straps of her suit and wiped a thin layer of dust from her goggles. Her crew of engineers and miners were working in the tunnels beneath the colony, extracting rare minerals that were immediately shipped off to Deathworlder factories. The humans here were treated like tools, efficient, replaceable, and disposable. But Mara had a fire inside her, one she had hidden carefully until now. She glanced at the control panel she had rigged herself. It was crude by Deathworlder standards, but effective. She had managed to tap into a faint communication channel used by the Deathworlder fleet, a network no one else had dared touch. The messages were short, sharp, and full of commands that indicated more than just occupation. They indicated war. The Deathworlders were preparing to move deeper into human territory, destroying colonies that resisted. Mara felt her chest tighten. She had seen what the Deathworlders did to entire settlements. Villages turned into ashes, fields scorched, families lost without a trace. The humans of Ares 7 were lucky that the fleet had not yet noticed them, but she knew luck had limits. The question was not if the fleet would come, but when. Her assistant, a wiry man named Tavin, approached with a tray of maintenance tools. "You really think anyone will listen to you if you bring this up?" he asked, his voice low. The tunnels were alive with the sounds of drilling and machinery, the constant hum of life under pressure. "Even if you have proof." "Most people don't want to hear the truth until it hits them in the face," she said. "But we can't wait for that. If we do nothing, there won't be a face to hit." Humans had survived on worlds that should have killed them. They had built shelters from the poisonous soil, drawn water from rocks, and learned to grow crops in conditions no other species could endure. The Deathworlders considered them weak, but weakness was a misunderstanding. They were adaptable, clever, and dangerous when pushed. The day the first scout ship appeared was almost anticlimactic, if it weren't for the tension it carried. It emerged from the gray clouds like a shadow, sleek and terrifying, its hull reflecting the stormy sky. Humans paused, staring through observation windows as the vessel hovered for a moment, as if sniffing the air before releasing a pulse that scanned the surface. Mara's stomach churned. This was a warning, not an attack, but warnings often preceded death. She moved quickly through the tunnels, gathering her crew. "Listen up," she said, her voice firm. "We've got visitors. They're here to check on the colony, and they don't like what they see. This is our chance to prepare. Not just to survive, but to show them they underestimated us." Old mining machinery was converted into defensive turrets, energy conduits were rerouted to provide power to improvised shields, and sensors were placed to give early warnings of approaching ships. Every human in the colony was enlisted in some way. Even the children had tasks, monitoring structural integrity, gathering materials, and reporting anomalies. Every person contributed, turning fear into organized action. Mara paused for a moment to catch her breath. Outside, the storm raged, lightning illuminating the colony in brief, stark flashes. It struck her how fitting it was. Humans lived under storms, thrived under pressure, and turned adversity into strength. The Deathworlders had no idea what they were up against. By nightfall, the first attack came, not from ships, but from the skies. The Deathworlder drones descended in swarms, designed to test defenses, identify weak points, and instill terror. Mara watched through the reinforced window as the drones fired their scanning beams, probing the colony's structures. For a moment, panic flickered among the humans, but then Mara gave the signal. The turbines whirred, the shields powered up, and the converted mining lasers erupted in a synchronized barrage. The drones faltered, some exploding in brilliant flashes of light against the storm, others retreating, sending warning signals back to the fleet. Humans cheered. They had won a small victory, but it was a statement. They were not defenseless. As the night stretched on, Mara accessed the hacked fleet channel again. She discovered a pattern in the Deathworlders' patrols, information she could use. The fleet would arrive in waves, bigger and stronger than anything the colony could withstand. But Mara did not despair. Humans had a way of surviving where others died. They improvised, adapted, and learned faster than any other species. The question now was not survival, but strategy. She gathered her crew around a holographic table. It displayed the colony in 3D with overlays showing potential attack paths. "We've survived because we've learned to think differently," she said. "We don't have their ships, their weapons, or their numbers, but we have our minds, our courage, and our determination. That is enough." It has to be. Those who couldn't fight would reinforce shelters and manage communications. Every person had a role. Tavin looked at Mara, skepticism in his eyes. "It's dangerous," he said quietly. "We might not survive the first wave. If we act, we might live, and we might show the Deathworlders that humans are not prey." She saw something she had never seen before, a glimmer of hope, sharp and burning, rising in the hearts of those around her. The Deathworlders would come. They always did. But for the first time in human history, they would come not to conquer easily, but to meet a species that refused to bow. Humans had endured worse than storms, worse than hostile planets, worse than a galaxy that wrote them off as weak. Now they were ready to endure everything the Deathworlders could throw at them, and more. Mara clenched her fists. She thought of the countless human colonies that had already been destroyed, the families lost, the lives wasted. Enough was enough. Humanity had endured too much, and now it was time to strike, not blindly, but with cunning, courage, and relentless ingenuity. The first part of humanity's rebellion had begun. The Deathworlders would soon learn that humans were not the fragile creatures they had assumed. They were survivors, inventors, fighters, and thinkers. They were humans, and they had had enough. And in that moment, with the storm raging above and the colony alive with determined activity, Mara knew that the spark of defiance had been lit. It would not burn out. It would grow. It would spread. And when the Deathworlders finally came, they would find humans waiting, not as prey, but as predators in their own right, armed with brains, courage, and the unshakable will to survive. The storm above Ares 7 raged on, lightning splitting the sky. But inside the tunnels, the human colony was alight with hope, determination, and preparation. The galaxy might have written humans off, but here, on a planet that should have killed them, humans were proving something the stars had never expected. That no force, no matter how mighty, could extinguish the spirit of a species that refused to surrender. And as Mara Kellen looked out across the colony, she whispered, almost to herself, "They'll see. They'll all see what humans can do." The colony on Ares 7 was still alive with activity long after the storm had passed. The first wave of Deathworlder drones had retreated, leaving behind a scarred landscape and a hum of renewed determination among the humans. Mara Kellen walked through the tunnels, her boots kicking up dust as she inspected the converted turrets and makeshift barriers. Every corner, every corridor, every human had a role now. Fear still lingered in some eyes, but it was tempered by resolve. She stopped beside Tavin, who was checking a newly rigged sensor array. "How are the readings?" she asked. "Stable," he said. "The traps are aligned with the asteroid tunnels outside the colony. If they come again, they won't know what hit them." He allowed a small, proud smile. "You've done something impossible, Mara. You've made a plan that can actually work." Representatives from each settlement had gathered. Miners, engineers, farmers, and even some of the older warriors who had survived harsher worlds than Ares 7. They sat around a circular table, staring at a holographic projection Mara had rigged from old mining schematics. In the 3D projection, Mara highlighted the pathways drones had taken during the first encounter. "The Deathworlders think they are untouchable," Mara began, her voice steady. "They have fleets, weapons, and control over the galaxy's resources, but they don't understand us. They think our weaknesses define us. They don't see that our strength comes from those very weaknesses. We live where nothing else survives. We adapt. We improvise. And we fight when they think we cannot. They can be outsmarted, and we will not wait for them to strike again. We will strike first. We will prove that ingenuity, courage, and coordination can defeat even the strongest enemy." Farmers and miners who had never touched a weapon learned to operate turrets and traps. Every person contributed, from the youngest children observing sensor feeds to the elders plotting defensive layouts. Mara spent most of her time in the command center, monitoring fleet patterns and relaying orders. Through the hacked Deathworlder channel, she observed the movements of the fleet. Patterns emerged. Scouting ships moved in predictable paths, supply lines followed the same routes, and the larger capital ships often ignored smaller threats. This knowledge became the foundation for their strategy. The humans' first real offensive operation was a small raid on a Deathworlder scout ship that had drifted too close to the colony's territory. Mara personally led the mission aboard one of the converted cargo vessels, piloted by a team of humans who had learned the tricks of stealth and evasion. The ship moved like a shadow through the asteroid belt, every maneuver calculated to avoid detection. When they reached the scout, Mara gave the signal. The vessel's plasma cannons fired, striking the ship's engines with precision. Sparks and smoke erupted as the scout veered off course, crippled. The humans cheered over their communications network. It was a minor victory, but a psychological blow to the Deathworlders. For the first time, they saw that humans could fight back, and they could fight intelligently. Back on Ares 7, the success of the raid sent waves of excitement through the colony. Humans who had never seen space combat felt pride swell in their chests. Even those who worked in the mines or tended crops understood that they were part of something larger, a movement that would change the fate of their species. Mara moved through the crowd, sharing quiet words of encouragement and planning the next steps. "Each victory teaches us something," she told Tavin. "We learn, we adapt, and we improve. That's how humans win, not because we are stronger than the enemy, but because we refuse to lose." Humans in nearby systems began sharing knowledge, coordinating supply lines, and forming secret alliances. The spark Mara had ignited was becoming a flame. But the Deathworlders were not idle. They began deploying larger patrols, testing the humans' defenses, and sending messages that were meant to intimidate. Mara intercepted these communications, studying the fleet's weaknesses, noting patterns, and predicting their next moves. The humans adapted, creating decoys, false signals, and traps designed to exploit every flaw. The next encounter was larger and more dangerous. A squadron of Deathworlder fighters approached the colony, supported by a small capital ship. Humans launched a coordinated defense, using asteroid tunnels as cover. Turrets fired, plasma cannons tracked moving targets, and the improvised shields absorbed incoming fire. Mara's fleet of converted cargo ships flanked the enemy, striking from unexpected angles. The battle was chaotic, with sparks flying, explosions lighting the asteroid field, and alarms ringing across the colony. Humans fought with determination, each action calculated to maximize effect while minimizing risk. They lost some ships, and several crew members were injured, but the squadron was forced to retreat. The capital ship sustained heavy damage and withdrew. It was a major victory, and the humans celebrated. They knew the Deathworlders would return, stronger and more determined, but the lesson was clear. Human ingenuity could turn the tide of battle, even against a technologically superior enemy. Mara called a meeting after the battle. She addressed the colony through a holographic link, showing the damage inflicted on the Deathworlder squadron. "This victory proves what I've always known," she said. "Humans are not the weak species they think we are. We survive, we adapt, we fight, and we will not stop." Every small victory built momentum, turning fear into confidence and despair into determination. The months that followed were intense. Mara oversaw training drills, coordinated raids on enemy supply lines, and devised new strategies for future encounters. Humans who had once felt powerless began to see themselves as part of something greater. They were not just survivors, they were fighters, planners, and innovators. One evening, Mara walked alone to the highest observation platform on the colony. She looked out at the stars, each one a distant system under Deathworlder control. She thought of the humans across the galaxy, scattered, oppressed, and underestimated. They were waiting for leadership, for a spark that would unite them in resistance. And she realized that spark had begun on Ares 7. Tavin joined her, silent at first, watching the flickering lights of the colony below. "Do you think we can really win?" he asked quietly. Mara smiled, not with arrogance but with quiet confidence. "We've already won more than we realize," she said. "Every time we survive, every time we fight back, every time we learn something new, we win. The Deathworlders may have fleets, but they don't have what we have. We have the human mind, the human spirit, and the human will to survive. That is stronger than any weapon." Mara felt a sense of calm determination. The humans had taken their first steps toward rebellion, but this was only the beginning. There would be more battles, more losses, and more challenges, but the human spirit was unstoppable. As night fell over Ares 7, the colony glowed with life. Humans worked, trained, and prepared. Mara returned to the command center, reviewing the intelligence gathered from the Deathworlder channels. Every piece of information was valuable. Every pattern, every weakness, every mistake. She plotted the next steps carefully. Smaller colonies could be linked through secure communication channels, forming a network capable of resisting attacks and coordinating strikes. Improvised ships could be deployed to harass supply lines, forcing the Deathworlders to split their forces. Humans would not wait for defeat. They would bring the fight to the enemy. And so, the humans of Ares 7 became more than survivors. They became a force to be reckoned with, a symbol of resistance and ingenuity. They knew the Deathworlders would not relent, but neither would they. The galaxy had underestimated them for too long, and now it would begin to see the truth. Mara Kellen looked out at the stars one last time before returning to her work. Somewhere out there, the Deathworlder fleet was moving, preparing for the next encounter. But humans had learned, adapted, and fought. They had discovered that courage, intelligence, and unity could overcome any obstacle. The rebellion had begun. Humans would no longer be victims. They would fight, survive, and change the fate of the galaxy. And as Mara returned to her command station, she whispered, more to herself than anyone else, "We are ready. They will see what humans can do. And they will learn to fear us, not because we are strong, but because we never give up." The asteroid belt near Ares 7 had always been dangerous, even for humans. Sharp rocks jutted out like jagged teeth, and narrow tunnels twisted unpredictably through the dense field. But Mara Kellen saw opportunity where others saw danger. This belt was perfect for an ambush. The Deathworlder fleet was approaching. Scouts had spotted their approach several hours earlier. Mara studied the fleet's formations on the holographic map. There were 5 capital ships, each surrounded by dozens of smaller attack vessels. They were strong, disciplined, and confident. The Deathworlders expected an easy victory. They did not anticipate human ingenuity. Mara gathered her fleet of converted cargo vessels and smaller combat ships. Each one had been rigged with improvised weapons, adaptive shields, and clever modifications. Some had mining lasers adapted for combat. Others carried electromagnetic pulse devices to disable enemy sensors. Every ship and every human on board had a role. "Remember," Mara said, addressing her pilots, engineers, and soldiers, "we cannot beat them head-on. We will not charge blindly into their firepower. We will use the terrain, the asteroids, and our minds. They expect straightforward tactics. We will give them something they cannot anticipate. Strike smart, strike together, and strike hard." The first strike came from the asteroid tunnels themselves. Explosives had been placed in narrow passes, rigged to detonate when enemy ships passed. The blast was sudden and devastating. 2 Deathworlder fighters were shredded against the rock, their pieces scattering through the void. Others were forced to swerve, narrowly avoiding collision. Panic rippled through the enemy ranks. Humans had turned the terrain into a weapon. Mara's fleet moved next. Stealth ships emerged from hiding, striking from multiple angles. Plasma cannons tore into the sides of capital ships, exploiting weaknesses in the Deathworlders' armor. Smaller human fighters darted through gaps, harrying the enemy, drawing their attention away from the traps Mara had set. The battle was chaotic. Explosions rocked the asteroid field, lighting up the dark void with bursts of fire and metal. Humans moved with precision, anticipating the enemy's actions and adapting instantly. Where the Deathworlders relied on brute strength and technology, humans relied on intuition, creativity, and teamwork. Mara piloted her own vessel, weaving through the tunnels at impossible speeds, coordinating attacks through a secure network. She could hear the excitement in her crew's voices as they reported successes. Another fighter destroyed, a capital ship forced off course, a sensor array disabled. Every small victory added to the momentum. One of the larger Deathworlder ships tried to charge directly through the asteroid belt, confident in its power. Mara had anticipated this move. She triggered a series of traps, collapsing a narrow tunnel onto the ship. Rocks and debris tore through its hull, forcing it to retreat. The humans cheered, but there was no time to celebrate. The rest of the fleet was still dangerous, still capable of destroying them if they made a mistake. Tavin, manning the sensor controls, pointed to a cluster of enemy vessels. "They're regrouping," he warned. "They're trying to flank us from the outer belt. They'll overextend themselves, and that's when we hit the center." She issued orders, and the human fleet split into smaller units, each attacking different parts of the enemy formation. The Deathworlders struggled to respond, their superior numbers blunted by human strategy and the hazards of the asteroid belt. As the battle raged, Mara noticed something remarkable. Humans who had never flown a ship, never fired a weapon in space combat, were improvising in real time. A young pilot named Lyra guided her ship through a narrow tunnel, using gravitational pull from nearby asteroids to slingshot behind a capital ship, hitting its weak point with a concentrated plasma blast. Another engineer, Soren, had rigged a ship's mining laser to fire in pulses, damaging multiple enemy fighters at once. Humans adapted faster than the Deathworlders could react. The battle reached its climax when Mara spotted the flagship of the Deathworlder fleet. It was larger than any other ship, heavily armored and bristling with weapons. Destroying it would be nearly impossible, but Mara knew that if she could cripple it, the rest of the fleet would falter. She coordinated a risky maneuver. Several human ships feigned retreat, drawing the flagship into a narrow corridor. Explosives and collapsing asteroids awaited. The flagship pursued, confident in its power, only to be trapped. The corridor closed around it, massive rocks puncturing its hull, engines failing, systems sparking. Mara's crew fired their plasma cannons at critical points, hitting the ship again and again. Smoke and fire erupted as the flagship faltered, finally breaking apart against the rocks. The Deathworlder fleet began to retreat, their pride and confidence shattered. Humans had achieved what no one thought possible. They had defeated a larger, stronger force using intelligence, strategy, and sheer determination. Back on Ares 7, news of the victory spread quickly through the colony. Humans celebrated, but there was no room for complacency. Mara gathered her leaders and crew, addressing them through the colony's communication network. "This victory is ours, but it is only the beginning," she said. "The Deathworlders will regroup. They will come back stronger with more ships, more weapons, and more aggression. But we have shown the galaxy and ourselves that humans are not weak. We survive where others fail. We adapt where others cannot. And we fight when all seems lost." Human ingenuity and courage could win battles, but the galaxy was vast, and the Deathworlders were relentless. Mara understood that survival would require more than courage. It would require preparation, intelligence, and alliances. She began reaching out to other species oppressed by the Deathworlders, forming a coalition of the willing. In the weeks that followed, humans strengthened their fleet, improved their technology, and expanded their communication networks. They shared tactics, taught each other new skills, and continued to turn every disadvantage into an advantage. The asteroid belt, once a dangerous obstacle, became a training ground and a proving ground for the human fleet. Mara's vision of a coordinated resistance was taking shape, and every human involved felt the excitement of being part of something historic. One evening, Mara stood on the observation deck, looking out at the stars. The battlefield had changed the humans in a fundamental way. Fear had been replaced by confidence. Desperation had been replaced by purpose. They were no longer victims waiting for destruction. They were fighters, leaders, and survivors who had proven their strength against impossible odds. Tavin joined her silently, watching the stars. "Do you think they'll come back?" he asked. "They will," Mara replied. "And when they do, we will be ready, not because we are stronger, but because we are smarter, faster, and braver. We have survived what no other species could, and that is our true power." For the first time in generations, humans across the outer rim felt hope. They were no longer subjects of oppression. They were a force that demanded respect, feared for their unpredictability and intelligence. The Deathworlders had underestimated them, and that would be a mistake they would never make again. The first major clash was over, but the war had only just begun. Mara looked at her crew, their faces lit by the soft glow of the control panels. Each one had contributed to a victory that no one thought possible. And she realized that the true strength of humans was not in weapons or ships, but in their minds and their hearts. The galaxy was vast, and the Deathworlders were powerful, but humans had a weapon that no one else possessed: the refusal to surrender, the ability to adapt, and the courage to fight for every inch of survival. Mara clenched her fists, feeling the fire of determination burn brighter than ever. She knew the next battles would be harder, the enemies stronger, and the stakes higher. But she also knew that humans had a secret weapon far more powerful than any fleet: themselves. And somewhere deep in the void of space, the Deathworlders' remaining forces were taking note. They had been challenged, humiliated, and outsmarted. The humans of Ares 7 had shown them that the weak could fight back, and that the galaxy was about to change forever. As night fell over the asteroid belt, the human fleet regrouped, repairs underway, weapons restocked, and strategy refined. Every pilot, engineer, and soldier knew that this victory was a beginning, not an end. And Mara, standing at the helm of her command vessel, whispered quietly, "We've won the first battle, but the war is just beginning. And we will show them what humans can do." And now they were ready to survive and triumph against the strongest force in the galaxy. The human fleet had grown since the battle in the asteroid belt. Word of their victory spread quickly across the outer rim, reaching colonies that had long lived in fear under Deathworlder control. Mara Kellen's vision was expanding, too. Humans would no longer wait for the enemy to come, they would strike first. If they could disrupt supply lines, sabotage fleet operations, and inspire other oppressed species, they could shift the balance of power. Mara's fleet jumped through hyperspace toward a Deathworlder system known for its heavy shipyards and supply depots. This was a bold move. The system was heavily defended, but Mara knew the Deathworlders relied on their confidence, their assumption that humans were weak. She intended to prove them wrong. Inside the fleet, every crew member was tense but determined. Humans who had never left their homeworlds were now seasoned pilots, engineers, and strategists. They had learned to improvise, to act under pressure, and to trust one another. Mara walked through the command ship, offering quiet words of encouragement to each team. "This is not just about attacking their ships," she said. "This is about sending a message. The galaxy must know that humans do not bow, do not hide, and do not surrender. Every strike we make must show them that we are not to be underestimated." The first phase of the operation was sabotage. Mara deployed small stealth teams in modified shuttles to infiltrate a supply station orbiting a barren moon. These teams carried explosives, EMP devices, and hacking tools. Each member had trained for weeks, but this was the first real test. The stealth teams moved through the shadow of the moon, cloaked by asteroid fragments and the darkness of space. The humans' heartbeats raced, but their hands were steady. They bypassed security sensors, navigated maintenance tunnels, and reached the core of the supply station. With precise timing, they detonated the charges, disabling fuel lines, weapons storage, and communications arrays. Alarms rang across the station, but by the time Deathworlder forces responded, the humans had vanished. Back on the command ship, Mara monitored the situation. "Excellent work," she said, her voice steady but full of pride. "Every strike counts. Every action shows the Deathworlders that humans are not helpless. We adapt. We fight. We survive." Smaller ships darted around the larger capital ships, firing plasma cannons and EMP pulses, disabling sensors and shields. Mara's strategy was not to destroy everything outright, but to create confusion, force the enemy to split their attention, and expose vulnerabilities. One of the Deathworlder flagships attempted to target the human command vessel directly. Mara anticipated the maneuver. She directed a squad of fast attack ships to flank it from multiple angles. Coordinated plasma bursts struck weak points, disabling its weapon systems temporarily. The flagship reeled, giving the human fleet a critical advantage. Meanwhile, Mara coordinated boarding teams to take control of lightly defended supply vessels. Humans moved with efficiency, using hand-to-hand combat, quick thinking, and the element of surprise. They captured ships, salvaged weapons, and used the newly acquired vessels to strengthen their fleet. The battle raged for hours, but Mara's tactics worked. The Deathworlders, though powerful, were disoriented and frustrated. Their formations were broken, their supply lines disrupted, and their confidence shaken. The humans had shown that even in enemy territory, they could strike decisively and survive. But this was not just a military operation. Mara had a larger goal. She had begun reaching out to other species oppressed by the Deathworlders, sharing knowledge and coordinating efforts. The humans' success inspired them. Small fleets from alien colonies joined in, providing support, intelligence, and additional firepower. Together, they became a coalition, united by the desire for freedom and the recognition of human ingenuity. Mara watched the coalition grow with pride. She had started with a single colony, a few converted ships, and a spark of determination. Now they were a force capable of challenging a galaxy-spanning empire. Humans had proven that courage, intelligence, and adaptability were weapons more powerful than any fleet. During a lull in the fighting, Mara convened her leaders to plan the next move. They had weakened the Deathworlder shipyards, disrupted supply chains, and demonstrated their capabilities. The next step was a decisive strike that would send a clear message to the entire galaxy. "We have proven our strength," Mara said, "but we must now strike at the heart of their power. If we can disrupt their central command, destroy their production facilities, and rally more allies, we can change the balance of this war. We are not just fighting for survival anymore. We are fighting to reclaim the galaxy from oppression." Stealth ships infiltrated the Deathworlder capital system, targeting key communication hubs and control stations. Human engineers disabled weapons systems, sabotaged engines, and rerouted power to create chaos. The Deathworlders struggled to respond, their superior technology no match for the humans' adaptability and coordinated attacks. In the midst of the operation, Mara piloted her vessel toward the largest shipyard, a massive structure producing new capital ships. Her plan was daring, a full assault using every ship in her fleet, supported by coalition allies. The shipyard was heavily defended, but Mara had a strategy. Smaller human ships acted as distractions, drawing enemy fire and luring patrols away from critical points. Mara's command vessel and several attack ships moved in under the cover of debris fields and stealth technology. Plasma cannons struck key supports, and explosives detonated in precise locations, crippling the shipyard's operations. The Deathworlders fought back fiercely, but they were disoriented, reacting to attacks from multiple angles and unexpected tactics. Mara's crew moved with precision, coordinating maneuvers and adapting instantly to enemy actions. Every human involved understood the stakes. They were fighting not just for their survival, but for the freedom of countless species across the galaxy. By the time the battle ended, the human coalition had achieved a decisive victory. The shipyard was severely damaged, supply lines disrupted, and the Deathworlder fleet forced to retreat. Mara's strategy had worked. Humans had struck at the heart of enemy operations and survived. The victory sent ripples across the galaxy. Other oppressed species saw humans not as weak laborers, but as clever, brave, and unstoppable. Humans had become a symbol of resistance, a beacon of hope. Mara knew that this was only the beginning. The Deathworlders would regroup, but the tide had turned. The galaxy would never underestimate humans again. In the aftermath, Mara addressed the fleet. "We have struck at the heart of their power," she said. "We have shown that humans will not be passive victims, but our work is not done. We will continue to fight, continue to adapt, and continue to inspire others. The galaxy is watching, and we will not fail." Humanity was no longer content to survive. They were rising to change the galaxy. The stars stretched endlessly before the human fleet, silent witnesses to the rise of a species that refused to surrender. Mara Kellen stood on the command bridge, her eyes shining with determination. The war was far from over, but humans had shown their true power. They were survivors, fighters, and thinkers. They were humans, and they had had enough. The galaxy would remember that day, not just as a battle won, but as a turning point. Humans were no longer prey. They were predators in their own right, armed with intelligence, courage, and the unshakable will to fight for freedom. Mara whispered to herself as the fleet moved through the stars, "We've taken the first steps into their territory. They will see what humans can do, and they will learn to respect and fear our determination." And as long as Mara Kellen and her fleet stood, the galaxy would never see humans as weak again. The human fleet had grown beyond anything Mara Kellen had imagined. What had begun as a small group of converted cargo ships had become a coordinated force of hundreds of vessels, supported by allies from other species oppressed by the Deathworlders. The galaxy was taking notice. Mara stood on the bridge of her command vessel, staring at the viewscreen. Before her lay the Deathworlder core system, a cluster of planets, shipyards, and supply hubs that had long represented the heart of their power. This was it, the decisive battle. Mara knew the risks. If they failed, the human rebellion could be crushed and countless colonies would suffer, but failure was not an option. Humans had endured too much, sacrificed too many lives, and proven themselves capable of the impossible. This time they would finish what they had started. The fleet moved in formation, silent and efficient. Mara's plan was audacious. Smaller ships would infiltrate defense perimeters, sowing confusion and disabling weapon systems. The main fleet would then strike at the capital ships and shipyards, using every advantage they had gained through experience and ingenuity. Timing, coordination, and surprise would be their greatest weapons. "Remember," Mara said, addressing her officers, "we fight not because we hate the Deathworlders, but because we will not allow oppression to continue. Every strike we make is a statement. Humanity will survive, humanity will rise, and humanity will not be broken." Mara monitored every move, issuing adjustments to ensure the operation stayed on schedule. Meanwhile, the main fleet approached the outer orbital defenses. Deathworlder turrets activated, firing with deadly precision. Mara had anticipated this. She directed her ships to spread out, using asteroids, debris, and the angles of approach to minimize exposure. Human ingenuity turned disadvantage into advantage. Ships moved unpredictably, firing plasma bursts at weak points and deploying decoy drones to confuse targeting systems. The Deathworlders responded aggressively, sending waves of fighters to intercept. But the humans were prepared. They had trained for months, each pilot knowing the enemy's tactics almost instinctively. Lyra, the young pilot who had stunned Mara with her asteroid maneuvers in the first major clash, led a squadron through a narrow passage, striking at the flagship's engines with precision. The enemy vessel shuddered, unable to maintain formation, leaving it vulnerable to the main human fleet. As the battle escalated, Mara focused on the shipyards. They were producing new capital ships, a threat that could prolong the war indefinitely if left intact. Mara's engineers had devised a plan to infiltrate and disable the yards. Boarding teams, supported by diversionary fire from human ships, moved swiftly, planting explosives at key structural points and sabotage devices on power conduits. The explosions rocked the shipyards, halting production and causing chaos among the enemy forces. The Deathworlder fleet, though powerful, was disoriented. Their formations were broken, supply lines disrupted, and morale shaken. Mara seized the opportunity. She coordinated a concentrated attack on the remaining capital ships, focusing fire on weak points identified through intelligence and previous skirmishes. Explosions tore through hulls, shields failed, and one by one, the ships were forced to retreat or face destruction. During the battle, Mara received reports from allied species who had joined the coalition. They had launched their own strikes against secondary targets, further stretching the Deathworlders' defenses. The coordination was remarkable, different species working together, inspired by humanity's resilience and ingenuity. Humans had not only survived, they had united others in a fight for freedom. Amid the chaos, Mara's eyes scanned the battlefield. Her fleet had taken losses, but the victories outweighed them. She saw humans, engineers, and pilots working tirelessly, making split-second decisions and improvising tactics. Every human involved demonstrated what Mara had always believed, that determination, intelligence, and courage could overcome brute force. The decisive moment came when Mara led a small strike team directly at the Deathworlder Central Command vessel. It was heavily guarded, but Mara had planned for every contingency. Using stealth, precise maneuvers, and coordinated attacks from multiple angles, the humans breached the vessel's defenses. Boarding teams disabled critical systems, planted charges, and confronted the enemy officers. Within hours, the command ship was crippled, its destruction signaling a turning point in the battle. The remaining Deathworlder fleet, leaderless and disoriented, began to withdraw. Mara's human fleet pursued cautiously, ensuring the enemy could not regroup quickly. Each victory reinforced a growing truth across the galaxy. Humans were not prey, they were a force to be reckoned with. Back on Ares 7, the colony celebrated. The victory was monumental, but Mara reminded her people that the fight for freedom was ongoing. Every strike, every battle, and every strategic decision had brought them closer to their goal. Humanity had risen from survival to rebellion to leadership, inspiring allies and striking fear into those who had once considered them weak. Mara convened a council of leaders from human colonies and allied species. "We have shown the galaxy what humans can do," she said. "But this is not the end. The Deathworlders will recover. Others will attempt to suppress us. We must continue to build, train, and unite. We are no longer just survivors. We are leaders, innovators, and protectors of freedom. Humanity will ensure that no species is oppressed again." The Deathworlder fleet was scattered, shipyards destroyed, and supply lines disrupted. Humans and their allies worked tirelessly to secure liberated systems, repair damages, and ensure the survival of populations who had been under threat for generations. Mara spent long hours in the command center, planning the next phase of expansion. She studied star maps, fleet movements, and intelligence reports, preparing for challenges she knew were coming. Humanity had proven its strength, but the galaxy was vast, and threats would continue to emerge. Still, Mara felt a sense of pride and satisfaction. Humans had survived impossible conditions, fought back against a technologically superior enemy, and risen to inspire others. They had proven that courage, ingenuity, and determination could change the fate of entire species. One evening, Mara stood on the observation deck, looking out at the stars. Ships of the human fleet glinted in the distance, moving through space with purpose and precision. She thought of the countless colonies that had been liberated, the allies who had joined the fight, and the countless humans who had contributed to this victory. Humanity had come far from the days of survival on harsh, remote worlds. Tavin joined her, standing silently as they watched the stars. "We've done more than survive," he said quietly. "We've changed the galaxy." "Yes," she replied. "And this is just the beginning. Humans will continue to fight, to build, and to protect what we've earned. The galaxy will remember that we do not surrender, and we never will." Mara encouraged innovation, adaptation, and creative problem-solving, knowing that the true strength of humanity lay in its ability to think, learn, and act together. In the months that followed, the story of the human rebellion spread far and wide. Tales of courage, intelligence, and ingenuity inspired oppressed species across the galaxy. Mara's leadership, combined with the determination of every human involved, had created a movement that could not be ignored. The Deathworlders, once confident in their supremacy, were forced to acknowledge the new reality. Humanity was no longer a weak species to be dominated. They were a symbol of resistance, a beacon of hope, and a force capable of reshaping the galaxy. Mara walked through the command center, watching humans and allies collaborate seamlessly. Engineers repaired ships, pilots ran simulations, and strategists planned future operations. Every action demonstrated that humanity had learned, adapted, and risen to a level no one had anticipated. As the sun set on Ares 7, Mara reflected on how far humans had come. From a colony of expendable laborers to a united fleet capable of challenging the strongest forces in the galaxy, their journey had been extraordinary. But she knew that the true victory was not just in battles won, but in the spirit they had cultivated, the unwavering determination, ingenuity, and courage that defined humanity. Finally, Mara addressed her fleet and the coalition through the galaxy-wide communication network. "We have survived the impossible. We have fought against the strongest and triumphed. Today, humanity stands not as a victim, but as a leader, protector, and innovator. We will continue to defend freedom, inspire courage, and ensure that no species is ever oppressed again. We are humans, and we have had enough. The galaxy will know us, respect us, and remember us, not for what we endure, but for what we create and achieve." Mara looked out at the fleet, feeling the weight of history in her chest. Every human who had fought, adapted, and survived had contributed to this moment. Humanity had proven that intelligence, courage, and unity were more powerful than any weapon. The galaxy had underestimated them for too long, and now it would never make that mistake again. The stars stretched endlessly before them, silent witnesses to the rise of a species that refused to surrender. Mara Kellen smiled, confident in the knowledge that humans had not just survived. They had thrived, adapted, and claimed their place among the galaxy's strongest. Humanity had endured the storms of deadly planets, the cruelty of a merciless enemy, and the vastness of space itself. And now they had achieved something far greater, the respect, fear, and acknowledgement of a galaxy that had once dismissed them. The war was over, for now, but Mara knew that humans would continue to grow, explore, and defend the values that had brought them victory. Humanity had risen, and the stars themselves seemed to shine a little brighter in recognition of what they had accomplished. And as Mara stood on the bridge, watching her fleet glide through the void, she whispered, more to herself than anyone else, "We have survived, we have fought, we have risen, and we will never be forgotten. We are humans, and we have had enough.